Welcome to Survivalist Tactics Speaking. I'm Syreta, and I have my honored guest here today, Mataka Askari. And I said that correctly, right?
Yeah,
yes, he has a powerful testimony and story to share with us today. But I just want to let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit about this background that you have developed for yourself.
Well, my name is Mataka Askari. I'm from St. Louis. I grew up in a community that was poor. You know, everybody knows the story, of the background of those stories with people who come from impoverished communities, normalized trauma, people struggling with unhealthy coping mechanisms. So I grew up poor. It was a few routes that was available for me to come up out of that poverty. One of them was working, and a couple of them was illegal activities. I engaged in the illegal activities. My first encounter with the criminal justice system, I was 10 years old. Again, poverty was the thing that kind of like shaped and molded me. I got into them streets early, developed a lengthy criminal record. And then in February 1995, I started to serve a 30-year sentence with a mandatory minimum of 24 years for the illegal distribution and manufacturing of controlled substances. So all of that poverty, all of that trauma, all of those things that negatively impact those inner city communities that create the conditions that drive people to self-sabotage. I was a product of that.
Yeah, it changes your mindset. It changes who you are in the realm of just processing feelings, emotions, all of that.
And so when we think about how trauma impacts your brain, right? Trauma impacts the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for emotional regulation. It impedes your ability to regulate your emotions. That's one way that it affects you biologically or neurologically. It also impacts your prefrontal cortex, which deals with your thinking, planning, strategizing, executing, and coordinating. And your ability to comprehend and memorize. It's also responsible for some functions of the emotional regulation. However, when these are impeded by trauma, they do not function properly. And it's crazy because I just did something about this. When we talk about how these children in school are not able to comprehend or process this information, we never take into consideration the trauma that we know impacts your ability to learn.
Yes.
However, they are predicting how many prison beds they'll need by third grade literacy rates. And so what we're really doing is what we have to ask ourselves is, are these children are the disabilities that they have with comprehending the information specifically related to some learning disorder, or are they a byproduct of trauma?
Yes.
And most of them are a byproduct of trauma. Mine was a byproduct of trauma. And I didn't even understand, because trauma is normalized in our community. It's just the way it is.
Right.
The minute that you start talking about mental health, you're going to get two things. In our community, it's a synonym for crazy, right? Or you're weak.
True.
Yeah,
so it's hard for you as a young man, and most young men, to express your emotions.
Yes.
Now tell me a little bit about your certifications and some of these accolades that you've built for yourself over the last few years. I know you are a certified peer support specialist.
Yes, ma'am.
And go ahead on. Tell us.
I'm a certified peer support specialist. I'm a batterer intervention prevention specialist. I'm a certified CBT life coach. I'm a certified public speaker and group facilitator. I'm on the State Advisory Council for the Missouri Department of Mental Health. I am on the hub team for the Missouri Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes, ECHO Peer Hub. I'm on the panel of experts, and I'm also on a DOC Reentry Prison Improvement Board.
Now that's
a few things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. When did this shift happen? Because I know that there was dark times. Tell me about how that dark time led into the shift, if you don't mind.
So I'm just the incident that specifically triggered was the catalyst that produced the desire in me to change. I was at the Walls.
Jeff City.
MSP, the old penitentiary.
Yes.
And so they had bars, not doors. You could hear people. I was on the top walk, 8 walk, and I distinctly remember this situation. Now, I just got here. I got this 23 and a half years I got to do. I'm 23. So I got to do my whole lifetime. And so can you imagine how depressing that is? So I'm sitting here and I'm stuck in my mind, and I'm listening to these guys who have been locked up 10, 15, 20, 25 years. All they doing is hollering and playing. And I'm saying to myself, man, please, I don't want to be like that when I get out of here. You know, if I have some life left, I want to be able to live it in a different way from what brought me there. I gave the worst part of me an opportunity to lead my life, and it ended me in prison. I wanted to give a better part of myself an opportunity to live my life. That was my mindset. And so that incident, from hearing them all that night when I was there, and I was still in my mindset, stuck in my depression.
Yes.
And so I was like, man, I can't do this. And it's crazy because I wasn't looking for a specific thing to transform me. It came to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
Let me tell you about the Mataka that I met and when I met him. I was only out of my own incarceration for about 4 months. Not a lot of people had known that I was incarcerated, and I chose to invite some people that were close to me to a discussion panel that I had been able to participate in based around trauma and imprisonment, and how people who are, even though imprisoned, maybe on a crime that, might be deemed as a class A offense, a violent criminal, how they are a result of their background. And sometimes forgiveness has to transcend even from them to people on the streets. And Mataka was a co-presenter, and I was so impressed at the ease in which he was able to field the questions and answers, because he had a brevity and a depth of knowledge that you just don't find even on people, even in individuals who have been in society. He was coming from a level in which I was so very impressed. I just soaked it in. So I want to thank you for being here, but I also want to ask you, as you've come out on this other side, and you know that night that you heard that screaming, that was not who you were.
It definitely wasn't. And
Tell me the steps in front of you from there.
It's crazy. So when I talk about the thing that I feel like I encountered that transformed my life, it was definitely the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? Yeah. So I feel like we conditioned to believe certain things in this society about ourselves, particularly in the communities that I come from. I feel like we internalize unhealthy ideas and images about ourselves, especially when this is reinforced from the environment around us, and we start to identify ourselves as these things. And so out of that identity that really wasn't me, it was an identity that I created, or that was created for me, and I identified with. It was a self-sabotaging, self-destructive identity. That's what led me to prison. When I started to study the autobiography of Malcolm X, I noticed that he had embraced a different ideology, and he had, in embracing that ideology, he had an identity shift. And in his identity shift, he rediscovered his love for knowledge. He was able to understand how the external conditions create the conditions that drive people to self-sabotage.
Yes.
He allowed himself to go inside because he was in prison and do the most important work, that internal work.
Yes, very much so. It's all about self.
That internal work.
It is. If you're making choices and decisions that are going nowhere, you're going nowhere. You've got to envision yourself to where you want to be.
So think about this, though. Think about how many people cannot envision themselves because we have been conditioned to believe that, especially, so what is the purpose of education? The purpose of education is to raise you from your infancy into the full realization of your potential. So we have a society where the educational system is not doing that, because if that was enough, then the problems that we need solutions to would already be here.
Absolutely.
And so when you talk about, like, even my credentials, these are cool. These are things that get me through the door because they're things that the academic community recognizes. But the bulk of my information that transformed my life did not come from any of that.
No, it came through living life and those experiences.
Learned experiences, lived experiences. Yes, ma'am.
So if you want to tell our viewers, I would really love it if you could, in a few sentences, statements, point our viewers on what they need to do so they don't make the same 23 plus years missing, the same 14 and a half years missing, that they can understand that, hey, this image that I have set up for myself is not who I am. This image that maybe I saw on TV, that I heard in some music, does not have to portray what I become. Mataka.
And so for me, this is in the story of my transformation. When I was there and it was making all that noise, I was asking myself, why am I here? Well, you're here because you engaged in some behavior to put yourself in the play to be judged. Well, why did you behave like that? I behaved like that because I was thinking a particular way. Well, why were you thinking like that? Because you took in some wrong information. So for me, the thing that I started to do, again, along with the autobiography of Malcolm X and several other books, I started to take in different information. I knew that the root of my behavior was connected to the way I felt and think. I felt thought and think, thought and felt.
Yes.
So what I wanted to do was, I said I have to change some different information, and then I started to change, and I noticed that I started to become more curious, and then out of that curiosity, I started to discover things that empowered me.
Yes.
I started to develop a love for knowledge. I started to develop a deeper compassion and a connection to the people, and all of that just helped me what I felt to believe would become a better person.
Because Mataka, that's who you are.
Thank you.
I'm so glad Mataka came on today, and this will not be the last time that we see him. You will come back and help us to change, because that's what it's all about. If you're doing the same things, you're going to get the same result. Now, I didn't make that up. I'm sure you've heard it before, but it's all about changing your mindset.
And it's the mathematical equation. 2 + 2 gonna always equal 4.
That's exactly right. Thanks,
no doubt.
Mataka.
It's always gonna equal 4. If you do the same thing, you do the same thing is gonna the result is gonna be the same thing.
Absolutely. I want you to come back next week. Survivalist Tactics Speaking LLC. This is our podcast based on changing.
Changing.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.